Mr. Gibril Faal is the director of GK Partners, a United Kingdom-based company that specializes in society, responsible entrepreneurship and management, governance and legal structure, ethic and Islamic finance and legal finance. He is also the chairman of Faal, which is Africa Foundation for Development, which works to expand and enhance the role of diasporans play in African development. He is also the founder of Remit Aid, a program to transform remittances into sustainable form of international development finance using tax reliefs and other microeconomic policies. We look forward to hearing how you do it.
May I first thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be here. Until yesterday, I had the great misfortune of never having landed on this beautiful and fair island. What I knew of Ireland was what I heard from the migrants from Ireland. Ireland had exported missionaries and builders. It had exported troubadours and poets. And it had exported writers who told us of the journeys and the joys and life in the counties. Now, the context of my speech is all about migration within the context of diaspora and development. And I have a small theory which I posit to you, that all of mankind migrate based on what I call the 5 L's. The first 3 of those L's are that we migrate to protect life, limb, and liberty. That is a reactive migration, and some of the refugees would fall under that category. The lovers of freedom would fall under that category. Then you have the other 2 L's. That is, people migrate to enhance livelihoods and lifestyles. And sometimes the economic migrants will be considered to fall under that category. If you look then, both for reactive migration, that is to protect life, limb, and liberty, for positive and proactive migration, that is to enhance livelihood and lifestyles, there is nothing evil about the whole enterprise. Migration itself is not evil, it's not terrible. It is an integral part of the human condition. So if you look at that from that context, and you look at the challenges of development you face, you can see that there is a great nexus between migration and development. And that creates opportunities for migrants and people who work in development to create a very productive partnerships, as it were. There is also a positive paradox one may observe in migrants. That is, you come in a country, generally the better you do locally in the country, the better you contribute to your country of origin or heritage. It is not true that when we come to the host countries, sometimes we're there for generations, and we do well. It is not true that we are sucking from that country for the countries of origin or heritage. The paradox is a positive one. We do well here, we contribute better there. So here and there is indeed the story of the migrant. In the question of Africa itself, I asked the question, the minister has told us of the impressive statistics of economic growth that we witness in Africa, of how the story of development has changed over time. But I tend to bring people's attention to 2 key issues in the past 70 years in Africa. If you take the post-war period, let's say 1940 plus 50 years to 1990, and you look at Africa and you say, with all of the problems that have happened there, with all of the turmoil that has happened there, what was the best achievement in the socio-economic and political setting of the African people in the 50 years, 1940 to 1990? One of the remarkable things that come out, I think, is the political independence of the African nation states. The story of independence in Africa is a good and positive story. Despite the centuries that preceded, the centuries of slavery and colonization that preceded the period, what we find was that Africans were able to mobilize, organize, and in most cases, in a peaceful manner, gain their independence from the colonial masters. Post-independence has been, to many, a disappointment, but the independence movement was a triumph in Africa. In fact, talking about post-independence and the disappointment of it, I had an apocryphal story about a politician, African politician, going about his business in Africa trying to charm the people, who was asked by one member of the audience, he said to him, "Sir, this business about independence, when will it end?" And of course, because of the disappointment that independence has not brought all of the hope that one had, there's some who think perhaps it should end. Nonetheless, independence was a triumph for Africa. If you then take the 20 years, 1990 to now, and you look at Africa and you say, what's the biggest achievement, socio-economic and political? I think you would answer the mobile phone. The mobile phone has put into practice what we learned at university in theories about technology leap. So for countries that do not even have a national grid, still you have mobile phone technology that have unleashed entrepreneurship, increased even freedom, political freedom. And in places like Kenya with M-Pesa, what you can do with mobile technology is even more advanced than in the developed world. For example, money transfer through mobile phone, paying of taxes, local authority taxes through mobile phones. In the UK, I don't know whether it's happened here, but Barclays have just adopted a new mobile technology system based exactly on what M-Pesa has done. I've given these examples because in both of these stories, you see the role of the African diaspora and migrant. Political independence in Africa was spearheaded by the Africans in the diaspora. Perhaps the most remarkable moment was the 1945 Manchester Pan-Africanist Congress. Later, if you looked at Africa, everyone who were the founding fathers attended that meeting in Manchester. Prior to that, it was the older diaspora, Africans of Caribbean, of American origin, who had written and helped stimulate the movement towards political freedom. Then if you look at mobile technology, perhaps the single most important person to play a role in that in Africa was Mo Ibrahim. He said he made more than $1 billion out of the deal, but he had taken a risk to introduce mobile phone in Africa when everybody thought this would not work. This country, people can't even feed themselves. How would they use mobile phone? But he was able to make that leap, just as the Pan-Africanists were able to make that leap, because the issue and the interest in Africa is not about an extracurricular activity. It was their life. It was the most primary thing that they could do. Today, it is still the case. I know the minister needs to leave because of prior engagement, so we'll excuse him.
My apologies.
Okay, thank you.
So fascinating. I'll get the details.
Yeah, indeed. Now, if you then look at currently the role of the diaspora, up to today, the diaspora are the biggest donors or contributors to African development. All of us here perhaps spend quite a good part of our incomes in remittances to support families back home. Now, what is it that we spend our remittances on? All the studies have shown that a great part of it goes to subsistence, food, education, health. Okay, a little part of it goes to our relatives who organize the most flamboyant of parties, but the bulk of it is on food, education, health. Then you look at the policy of Irish aid, or the policy of the Department for International Development, or for World Bank, and what are their priorities? To end hunger, to create facilities for education and healthcare. So there is no competition or schism or gap between what the diaspora is doing and what the development agencies are doing. They are all working towards the same goals, which creates the opportunity for some productive and creative partnerships. Now, one of the reasons why this does not flow so naturally is because it is indeed the case that these two actors do not necessarily fully understand each other. Those working in mainstream development do understand the African diaspora are part of the factors of diaspora development, but they do not fully appreciate that they are also actors in diaspora development. And those in the African community see the development, mainstream development actors as sometimes positive, in a good way, as benefactors, and in negative ways as do-gooders who do not understand what's happening. So this is the gap we have. It's not a huge gap. It is one that can be solved by simple dialogue and interaction. And in the United Kingdom, we tried this. When we started AFFORD in 1994, the aim was to help mainstream development players to understand, accept, and support the role of the diaspora in development. First, you need to understand it before you accept it. You need to accept it before you support it. Now, if we get to the stage in Ireland where Irish Aid, the charities, and all of those actors who work in international development understand better the role of the African diaspora in African development, both as factors and actors, then it will not be difficult at all, because it is part of their predisposition to accept that as partners. So the question becomes, how do they support the diaspora to do it? And in the United Kingdom, we've tried, we've lobbied for, argued for, and made a case for a whole number of things, including specific practical things. Like 20 years ago, we argued that there need to be dedicated diaspora development funding that particularly targets the diaspora organizations who are involved in development work. Part of the argument was, because of their predisposition, a general competition, them competing with the other civil society organizations, is an unfair competition. Because these agencies, these more structured and bigger organizations, would have actually a team of staff who do nothing but write funding bills. They know how to write them. Whereas the small and diaspora organizations won't be able to do it. And yet, if you're concentrating on the result and the impact they are having comparable and credible impact in development in Africa. It took us about 3 or 4 years to argue that in the United Kingdom, but it has happened. In the UK, we have, between the Department for International Development and Comic Relief, there is a fund called the Common Ground Initiative, which have, I think in total, is £40 million dedicated to diaspora and small organizations who would apply for the funds to enhance their work in international development. On a global level, we had, coordinated by the UNDP in Brussels, what was called the Joint Migration and Development Initiative, which again was a funding dedicated to diaspora organizations within the EU who are working with development partners in countries of origin. So the concept and the principle of dedicated diaspora funding is accepted by the United Kingdom and by, as an example, and by the international community in general, as demonstrated by JMDI, coordinated by the UN. And why is it that it wasn't too difficult for this to be accepted? Because Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and many countries are already fully committed and signed up to the global policy framework, from the Millennium Development Goals and the discussions happening now in terms of post-MDGs, to the Global Forum for Migration and Development, to the Africa-UK Strategy Partnership. All of these things, our governments in the United Kingdom and in the Republic of Ireland are fully committed and are active players in this. So the issue of finding the role of the diaspora is just a matter of detail and facilitation. It is interesting to note that in this year, the United Nations is going through its second round of UN high-level dialogue on migration and international development. The first one was in 2006, and that led to the creation of the Global Forum for Migration and Development. Now 2013, starting in March, leading all the way to the General Assembly in September or October, there is a new high-level dialogue. I think for the African community here in Ireland, this is an opportunity to pick on an international policy framework which the Republic of Ireland is totally subscribed to as a way to enhance the role of the diaspora in the formal structures of development. And for all of you in Ireland, what you need to remember is this. When the migrant contributes to the educating of children in rural Africa, or when they contribute to the starting of a small enterprise in the estuary of the Limpopo, all of that is part of the contribution of the Republic of Ireland. Because that income is earned from this country, taxes were paid here, and the people who are doing the money are able to do it because they have a fair life in this country. So the contribution of remittances, even these private remittances, are part of the contribution of the nation itself. Now, if we then look at how do you practically do this engagement, the African community does need to organize itself a little bit better. I am not of the view, which is often taken by governments, that they would want, say, the African community or the diaspora to organize themselves with a single voice. I am not of that view. In a pluralist society, the idea of a single voice sounds slightly too onerous for me. It is important to have a coherent voice. It is important to have the views of different people, but the government should allow for plurality, to hear different voices. What the African community needs to do is has absolute clarity in terms of what it wants to do, be able to be more formal, because within IRIS aid, or within the government institution, there is a degree of formality that is required. So formality is needed, coherence is needed, and of course, wide support within the community would be important, but exclusivity and singularity in the voice is not necessary or desirable in a democracy. Now, given the context then, that the main development actors from Irish Aid to the government and other big NGOs may indeed understand the role of the diaspora better, would have no difficulty in accepting it, then you get to the detail of how they support it. I would put it on the agenda now. Ask for and start discussing dedicated diaspora funding. I would suggest you put on the agenda now expanding the idea of volunteering to include diaspora volunteering. I would suggest you put on the agenda now that when the mainstream actors are getting involved in the international dialogue on migration and development, e.g. through the high-level dialogue for Global Forum for Migration and Development, that the African diaspora is a part of it. Just as remittances from a private individual to an African family is part of the effort of the Republic, it is also the case that when the Republic goes to talk about migration and development, its African community should be part of it. All of this involves a great deal of work within the African community in terms of the organizing. And yesterday I had a meeting with board members of the Africa Center, and I reminded them of a motto that we use in AFOR, that we should not be peddlers of problems, we should be merchants of solutions. All of this work involves problems, but unfortunately, the outsider is not interested in it. What we should be doing and offering to our partners is solutions and partnerships. Our problem is our burden, it's our work, it's what we should do. We should do it bravely, and we should carry the burden graciously. So I don't want to ban complaining, but I would say complain in closed doors. Do your complaining and your moaning indoors. And when you get out there, it is a positive message of the vision and the strategy you have, because your partners are interested in that additionality, not in the subtraction. And this even, it's a neurological fact that if you find yourself within this web of negativity, of problems, it drags down everybody into that vortex of negativism. And all of these complaints and problems we're talking about, they are indeed true. So it is not that we're making it up, it is true. Racism is true. Unfair terms are true. All of these are true. But our interest in it is not to fixate on the negativity, it's to concentrate on the problems, on the solving of the problem. So we would do, where necessary, the mourning, preferably in closed doors. We come out with solutions, engage with our partners, and together we achieve the greater good that we seek. Now, for you, the Africans who are actors and factors in diaspora development, for friends of Africa and the mainstream actors, all of us, we will not have Somali poets write verse about our love of Africa. We will not have Malian griots sing songs about our generosity to the land and the continent. Our reward would be the ability to unleash the potential of the African child and the posterity of that continent. And we all need to remember that these bad times that Africa lived through, and I say the past 200 years or so, it's just a bad period in the story of Africa. Today we hear on the news the horrible affairs of the Islamists destroying the monuments in Timbuktu. Timbuktu, in the 13th century, was the center of learning for the whole Islamic world. The town, the city, had 25,000 students in the 13th century. When Mansa Kankan Musa made his famous pilgrimage from Timbuktu to Mecca, he created a devaluation of currencies along his path, because he carried so much wealth, so much gold, that every country he passed, the value of the currency went down. That was the glory and the splendor of 13th century Africa, just to give one example. So when we formulate policies and ideas of development in Africa, please let us be ambitious. But this is the story of great cycles of civilization and great gifts from Africa to the whole world in different fields of civilization and human endeavor. Thank you very much.